Rain streaked the windows of the black transport van, blurring the world beyond the reinforced glass. Inside, silence weighed more than the chains around wrists. Martha 3 sat stiffly on the hard bench, back straight, chin down, stripped of her name and anything that felt human. The guards flanking her were motionless, faces hidden behind matte helmets, hands resting on stun batons. The van jolted once before slowing. A mechanical voice announcing, "House Halvern, processing new intake." The gates loomed high under harsh white floodlights, metal teeth against a starless sky. Cameras swiveled with soft clicks, scanning every inch of the arriving vehicle. The doors opened with a hydraulic hiss, damp night air washing in, smelling faintly of oil and disinfectant. A guard tugged at Martha 3's arm. No words, just movement. Beyond the gate, a cobblestone path led toward an austere mansion of pale stone, windows narrow like watchful eyes. The sound of boots echoed unnaturally loud in the still night. A second guard scanned her face with a handheld device, its green light flickering before stamping her wrist with fresh black ink. M3HV. Property assigned. Inside, corridors stretched long and sterile. White tiles gleamed under strip lights, every corner holding a camera that clicked and adjusted as she passed. Other handmaids in crimson robes moved silently, heads bent, steps measured and identical. No one glanced at her. No one dared. A woman in gray gloves waited at the far end of the hall. Her face was impassive, hair pulled back severely. She held a small slate and spoke in clipped, flat tones. Eyes down. Speak only when spoken to. Pain corrects disobedience. Curfew 21 sharp. You understand? Martha 3 gave a small nod. A gloved finger tapped the slate sharply. Thumbprint. She pressed her inked thumb to the cold surface. The woman didn't look up as she added, "Mistakes are not repeated here." A narrow door opened to reveal a room barely larger than a closet. Iron-framed bed. Thin blanket folded perfectly. Barred window, letting in a sliver of moonlight. A camera nested in the corner above the door, swiveled with a soft whir to face her. On the opposite wall, a speaker crackled to life. A smooth voice repeating over and over, "Purity of womb, purity of mind. Obedience keeps you safe." Dinner was served in a silent hall, lined with long tables. The commander's wife sat rigid at the head, her gaze sharp enough to slice. No one spoke. Metal cutlery tapped plates in an eerie rhythm. When Martha 3's eyes flicked toward another handmaid across the table, the woman immediately looked down, fingers tightening around her spoon until knuckles turned white. A guard shifted nearby, the leather of his gloves creaking. Later, a nurse entered her room without knocking, scanned her vitals with brisk efficiency, then left a small glass vial on the table labeled sedative, optional. No words, only the sound of the lock engaging as the door shut again. A red diode above it glowed steady, humming softly like a warning signal. Martha 3 sat on the bed, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the barred window where rain slid in crooked paths. The camera clicked once, adjusting. Somewhere down the hallway, footsteps stopped. Long silence. A shadow passed under her door and lingered. Then came the whisper. Hoarse, urgent, barely a voice at all, threading through the thin crack at the floor. "Run, before they break you." Dawn seeped through narrow windows, a pale, reluctant promise barely touching the cold stone walls. The building woke not with chatter or bells, but with the sharp thud of boots on tile, echoing down the long corridor. A guard opened Martha 3's door without a word, motioning her out with 2 fingers. She stepped into the hallway, where other new arrivals stood in a crooked line, red robes hanging stiff on thin shoulders. Silence clung to them heavier than the fabric. The air was sharp with disinfectant and cold metal. A single light flickered overhead, buzzing faintly. The women stood barefoot on the chilled floor, heads bowed, hands clasped in front like they'd been born knowing submission. An instructor emerged from a side door. The same gray-gloved woman from last night. She carried a thin cane, tapping it softly against her palm as she walked the line. Her voice was flat, unhurried, each word sharpened to a point. Eyes down. Tap. Speak only when addressed. Tap. Pain is correction, resistance is sin. Tap, tap. Curfew 21. No questions, no names. No one dared move. Even breathing felt dangerous. A girl at the end of the line sniffled quietly. A tiny sound swallowed by the cavernous corridor. The instructor's head turned sharply. She stepped toward the sound, cane slicing the air. Rule 1. The girl's lips trembled. Eyes down. A gloved hand struck her cheek with a swift, practiced motion. No anger, only method. The girl's knees buckled. No one looked up. The silence that followed was deeper than before, as if the walls themselves had closed tighter. The group was marched through a series of identical corridors, each lined with cameras that shifted soundlessly to track their movements. Religious chanting floated from hidden speakers, a hollow mechanical drone repeating the same verse. Grace is silence. Silence is grace. They entered a large room with a tiled floor, stained faintly pink despite endless scrubbing. No one asked about the stains. A guard stood near a heavy metal door at the far end, face unreadable. The instructor pointed at it with her cane and said only, "Mistakes wait there." A shiver passed through the line like wind in dry grass. Martha III felt her shoulders tense, as the door creaked slightly, a muffled thud sounding from the other side, then nothing. On the way back to their cells, another handmaid slipped close enough to whisper, breath barely touching the air. "Walls have ears, forget who you were, or they'll help you remember." She moved away before Martha III could turn her head. The corridor stretched long and narrow, footsteps echoing like a heartbeat. Just before reaching her door, Martha III felt the weight of someone watching. She glanced sideways and caught a red camera light blinking twice in deliberate rhythm, not scanning, but signaling. The guard behind her muttered low enough for only her to hear as the lock clicked on her door. Some rules keep you alive, others kill you slower. Evening light slanted through narrow windows, turning the corridor walls a pale, sickly gold. A guard opened Martha III's door without a word, motioning her forward. She followed, steps soundless on polished stone, the weight of the red robe dragging at her shoulders. They led her into a long dining hall, the air thick with polish and candle wax, yet still cold. A long table stretched down the center, dark wood gleaming, place settings perfectly aligned. 2 seats were already filled, the commander at the head, posture like iron, and his wife beside him, hands folded on the table, eyes sharp and assessing. Martha III was directed to stand at the far end, until a servant pulled out a chair. She sat only after the guard gave a small, silent nod. No one spoke. The ticking of a large clock on the wall felt deafening in the hush. A servant set a plate before her, steam curling upward. She kept her eyes on the rim of the dish, hands in her lap until the wife's voice cut the silence like glass. "Look at me when I address you." Martha III lifted her gaze slowly. The woman's lips curved in something too thin to be a smile. "You understand why you're here, don't you?" The commander's knife scraped against his plate, metal on stone. Martha III gave the smallest nod. The wife leaned closer, tone low, but slicing through the air. "One mistake, and you'll wish they sent you to the colonies instead." The commander finally spoke, voice measured, deliberate. "Discipline is expected. Gratitude is required." Each word landed like a weight on her chest. He didn't look at her as he spoke, only at the glass in his hand, turning it slowly between his fingers. Dinner resumed in silence. Cutlery tapped plates in precise rhythm, servants gliding noiselessly around the table. Martha III ate mechanically, the food tasteless, her body locked into stillness like it was part of the furniture. When the plates were cleared, the wife stood, eyes never leaving Martha III. A final remark, quiet enough that only she could hear. "Pray you never see his temper." The guard stepped forward, signaling her to rise. As she turned toward the door, she felt it, the weight of the commander's gaze on her back, cold and heavy, following her until the door clicked shut. The escort led her down the hallway in silence, but every step felt like an echo of that stare, clinging to her like chains she could never shake off. The corridor smelled of candle wax and something sharp, metallic. 2 guards appeared at Martha III's door without a word, motioning for her to follow. She rose silently, bare feet cold on the stone floor, red robe trailing like spilled blood behind her. They led her down a narrow hallway, where shadows clung to the corners and the air felt too heavy to breathe. A large wooden door creaked open, revealing a chamber lit by flickering oil lamps and a single cross-shaped window letting in pale moonlight. Handmaids in identical robes stood in a line along the wall. Heads bowed, hands clasped tightly. None of them moved as Martha III entered. None dared look up. At the center of the room stood a narrow bed draped in stark white sheets. A small table beside it holding a closed Bible, and a bowl of scented water that smelled faintly of ashes and lavender. Above the bed, painted in careful black strokes, were the words, "Fruitful is the silent womb." The commander entered moments later, his boots slow, deliberate against the floor. No greeting, no expression. The wife followed, face stiff, hands folded as if in prayer. A servant gestured sharply for Martha III to kneel. She obeyed without sound. A scripture was read aloud, the voice of the wife cold, measured. "Obedience grants life. Rebellion bears no fruit." Each word felt like a stone dropping into still water, leaving rings of dread spreading wider. Martha III was guided to lie on the bed, white sheets rough under her palms, one hand pressed gently but firmly on her shoulder. Not comforting, only restraining. The room was silent except for soft murmured prayers, the sound like wind moving through dead leaves. The ritual began without a word, mechanical, ceremonial, stripped of anything human. The lamps hissed softly. Someone's breath trembled in the corner. But no one looked up. No one spoke beyond the endless scripture repeating like a curse. When it was over, Martha III remained still on the bed, staring at the ceiling where faint cracks formed shapes like broken wings. Her fingers curled into the sheet, knuckles white, body cold, despite the heat in the room. A quiet whisper slipped from the handmaid lying on the bed beside her, words barely alive. "They say it hurts less if you forget you're alive." No one replied. The chamber fell silent again, except for the speaker in the wall, its recorded prayer washing over them like chains. Purity of womb, purity of mind. The guards finally gestured for her to rise. She dressed slowly, every movement mechanical, as if her limbs no longer belonged to her. The door closed behind her with a heavy thud, locking the night inside. Final hook, as the escort led her back to her cell. Martha III felt her own breath falter when she realized she could still hear the prayer echoing softly in her ears, even though the speaker was silent. The morning bell clanged once, dull and heavy, reverberating down the stone corridors. Doors unlocked with metallic snaps, one after another, releasing the handmaids into the hallway like pieces on a board. Martha III stepped out, eyes lowered, robe brushing the floor as she joined the line moving toward the main hall. The air was thicker today, not with dust or candle smoke, but with something invisible, heavier. Suspicion. No one met anyone's gaze. Boots of guards struck the tiles in a slow, deliberate rhythm, echoing like a warning. During kitchen duty, a young handmaid leaned too close, lips barely moving. "Careful. They trade secrets for bread." The words were gone before Martha III could react, swallowed by the sound of knives chopping in unison. Across the room, a guard turned his head, eyes hidden behind black glass. It felt as if he had heard everything. Later, while scrubbing stone steps, another voice slipped past her shoulder. Older, rougher, trembling. "Names make you safer, or they make you dead." The speaker didn't look at her, didn't even pause in scrubbing. Martha III's fingers tightened around the wet cloth, but she kept her head bowed. Afternoon inspections dragged on longer than usual. A door slammed somewhere distant, followed by muffled cries, and then silence. Everyone in the line froze. A single command cut through the air. Remove her. Heavy boots dragged a girl away screaming, her words lost under the echoing hymn from the speakers above. Grace is silence. Silence is grace. That night, the building breathed uneasily. Footsteps passed outside Martha III's cell, stopped, lingered. The lock rattled once, not opening, just testing. A gloved hand visible under the doorframe, waiting. She didn't move, barely dared to breathe until the shadow withdrew. Minutes passed, long and brittle. Then a hiss of air, a whisper cutting the stillness like a knife. One wrong word, and you disappear. The sound faded. The corridor remained empty, silent, swallowing every trace of warning. And Martha III lay awake until dawn, feeling the walls closing in tighter than the chains ever had. Dawn seeped into the narrow cell like a reluctant ghost. Pale light filtering through barred glass, painting the floor in thin gray stripes. Martha III shifted on the stiff mattress, her body sore from hours of unmoving sleep. Something crinkled beneath her hand. She froze, heart pounding. Breath caught halfway to her throat. Fingers slid slowly under the flat pillow, touching the dry, foreign texture of paper. No one left paper here. No one dared. The corridor outside was still. Only the distant hum of a speaker repeating its morning prayer. Purity of womb. Purity of mind. She slipped the object into her sleeve just as the lock clicked open and a guard's silhouette filled the doorway. A routine check. Eyes scanning walls, hands tugging at sheets. Nothing unusual. The guard lingered one beat too long, then left. Martha III sat on the edge of the bed, listening to footsteps fade. Only then did she unfold the scrap, trembling as if holding fire. 2 words, written in hurried strokes, letters jagged and uneven. We're near. She stared at them until her breath felt like knives in her lungs. Every sound in the hallway turned sharp. A creak of floorboards, a soft cough from a neighboring cell, keys jingling far away. She folded the note and slipped it under the mattress, fingers trembling hard enough to ache. Later that day, during chores, another whisper grazed her ear as a handmaid passed. Hope gets people killed here. The words clung like ice under her skin. Evening fell heavy, thick with unspoken tension. Footsteps halted outside her door again. The camera in the corner clicked softly, adjusting its aim. A long silence pressed in, smothering, until a low male voice slid through the crack beneath the door. Hoarse, deliberate, sounding more like a warning than comfort. Watch for the trap. They'll test you before they save you. The shadow lingered one breath longer, then vanished down the corridor, leaving the silence behind, heavier than before. Martha III lay awake staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between distant metallic sounds, clutching the memory of those 2 words on paper like a lifeline that could snap at any moment. The sun was pale that morning. Weak light filtered through the high stone walls of the garden, painting the gravel paths in dull gold. Martha III walked slowly behind 2 other handmaids, each of them holding pruning shears, baskets for thorns and clipped branches. A guard trailed them a few paces back, boots crunching in deliberate rhythm. The garden was silent except for the faint hum of a drone overhead, circling lazily, its red sensor sweeping back and forth. Roses lined the walkway, their petals lush and crimson, too bright against the lifeless walls, like drops of blood pinned in place. The gardener bent low over a bush. Gray overalls, face hidden by a hat pulled down too far. When Martha III knelt beside him, he spoke without looking at her. His voice barely air. There's a path. Snip. The scissors cut through a thorny stem. But not alone. Martha III's hands stilled on the shears. breath caught, eyes fixed on the ground as if the gravel had stolen her attention. The guard's shadow passed over them once, then moved on. She dared to whisper back, lips barely moving. "When?" The gardener snipped another branch, tossed it in the basket. "2 nights, north wall. Quiet." A sudden metallic hum rose as the drone dipped closer, its light sweeping across the path. Both froze, heads bowed until it passed, leaving only the sound of the wind stirring leaves. No more words were spoken, only the sharp, rhythmic sound of thorns falling, boots shifting on gravel, breath locked in their chests. When the task was done, the guard gestured for them to leave. As Martha III stood, the gardener brushed past her, a quick, deliberate movement no one else seemed to notice. A small twig slipped into her pocket. Back in her cell, she waited until darkness fell before pulling it out. Carved into the bark, almost invisible in the dim light, was a thin arrow pointing outward, the mark of a promise, or a death sentence waiting to be claimed. Night in the house of Halvern was usually still, the kind of stillness that wasn't peace but control. Every creak, every breath measured and known. This night was different. A muffled shout broke the silence, sharp, frantic, cut short, as if a hand clamped over a mouth. Boots pounded down the hallway, fast and heavy. Keys jangling, a door slammed open with a violent clang. Martha III sat rigid on her bed, staring at the red diode glowing above her door. The sound of a struggle seeped through the walls, whispers of protest, sobs bitten off. Then came the scrape of bodies dragged across stone, a scream torn from someone's throat before fading too fast, too final. Minutes stretched long, the corridor empty except for the ghost of footsteps echoing past. Then silence again, heavier than before, like the house had swallowed something whole and wanted no trace left. Dawn came pale and cold. Guards marched the handmaids into the courtyard, forming them into rows facing the main gate. The sky was a flat sheet of gray, the air sharp in their lungs. There, swinging gently from an iron hook on the gate, hung a red robe, empty, arms limp, the hood fluttering in the wind like it remembered the body it once held. No one spoke, no one breathed too loudly. The commander's wife stood on the balcony above, face calm, eyes bright like a satisfied predator. One guard murmured just loud enough for the rows to hear. "Lesson learned." The group dispersed slowly, heads down, steps soft as if afraid to wake a monster still nearby. Martha III walked back to her cell. The image of that empty robe carved into her thoughts like a brand she couldn't erase. That night, as lights went out and doors locked, a faint draft slipped under her door, cold as fear. A whisper followed, jagged and low, almost a hiss. "Next time, it could be you." The corridor outside Martha III's cell was darker than usual that night. Lamps dimmed low, shadows pooling in corners. A guard appeared without warning. No words, just a sharp gesture for her to follow. She obeyed, stepped silent on the cold tiles, heart thudding unevenly. They stopped before a heavy door she hadn't seen opened before. A creak of hinges. The faint smell of tobacco and old paper drifted out. Inside, the commander's study was lit only by a single desk lamp, its glow cutting a circle in the gloom, leaving the corners in deep shadow. He sat behind the desk, fingers steepled, face unreadable. He gestured for her to approach, slow, deliberate, like pulling her into a snare. When she stood before him, he reached beneath the desk, producing a cloth-wrapped bundle. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing an old, worn book. Pages yellowed, leather cracked. He slid it toward her across the polished wood. His voice was soft, deliberate, almost kind, but sharp underneath. "Knowledge like this." He paused, tapping the cover with one finger. "They burn women for less." Martha III stared at the book, hands stiff at her sides, unsure if touching it was salvation or a trap. Footsteps passed outside the door. The commander's eyes flicked to the sound, cold and assessing. He leaned closer, voice barely above a breath. "Take it." learn your own flesh. But remember, his gaze locked on hers, unblinking. One day, you'll owe me for this. She reached out slowly, fingertips brushing the cracked leather, the weight of danger settling in her palm as if the book carried a sentence yet to be spoken. A knock on the door made them both freeze. The commander's wife called softly from the hallway. "Are you coming to prayers?" His answer was smooth, steady. "Soon." He slid the book back toward Martha III, sharp eyes cutting into hers. A command, not a gift. She hid it under the folds of her robe as the door opened. The wife's gaze swept over her briefly, cold, searching, before moving on. When Martha III was escorted back to her cell, every step felt watched, every sound amplified. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the forbidden object like it might burn through her skin. Somewhere in the house, a distant bell chimed for prayers. But all she heard was the echo of his voice, soft as a blade sliding into flesh. "You'll owe me." Rain tapped against the barred window in uneven rhythm, small rivulets sliding down the glass like tears. The cell was dim, lit only by the red diode above the door, glowing steady, watching. Martha III sat on the bed, the forbidden book and the folded note spread on the thin blanket, both heavy as stones, though they weighed almost nothing. Every sound in the building felt sharper tonight. The creak of pipes, a distant metallic clank, the soft hum of the surveillance camera adjusting its angle. She reached for the book, fingertips brushing the cracked leather cover, recoiling as if from fire, then slowly opening it. Drawings of anatomy stared back at her, forbidden shapes, words she hadn't seen since freedom was a memory. A soft knock on the wall to her right, hesitant, urgent, a voice from the neighboring cell, barely a breath. "Don't trust him. Don't trust anyone." The words clung to the air, then silence swallowed them whole. She closed the book quickly, shoving it under the blanket just as footsteps approached. The lock rattled once. A narrow beam of light swept the room from the crack in the door. The guard didn't enter, only waited a long, too long moment, then moved on. Martha III's hands trembled as she unfolded the crumpled note again. "We're near." Two words that felt like a lifeline, or a noose, depending on who had written them. From the hallway, a loudspeaker crackled to life, the same hollow recorded voice chanting, "Obedience keeps you safe. Gratitude saves the soul." The mantra looped endlessly, filling the room like smoke she couldn't breathe out. She pressed her palms to her ears, rocking slightly on the bed, desperate to silence everything, the words, the choice, the weight crushing her chest. Freedom waited somewhere beyond these walls, but every path to it led through someone's hands, someone's deal, someone's betrayal. Just as she lay back, trying to still her breath, another piece of paper slid under her door. She stared at it for long seconds before moving, unfolding it with numb fingers. This one had sharper handwriting, darker ink, deliberate strokes that looked like they cut the page. "Decide before they do it for you." The lights dimmed to black, the diode above the door glowing like an unblinking eye in the dark. Martha III lay awake, heart pounding, the weight of both notes pressing on her chest harder than the walls themselves. Night pressed heavy over the house, a suffocating quiet broken only by the occasional groan of old pipes. Martha III sat on the edge of her bed, listening, waiting. 3 soft taps on the wall came like a heartbeat. A moment later, the door unlocked with a muted click, and a hooded figure slipped inside, finger to lips. They moved fast, silent, through narrow corridors behind the laundry room. A rusted hatch opened in the floor, the smell of damp earth and mold spilling up like a warning. Martha III climbed down a crumbling staircase, cold stone slick under her bare feet, water dripping in slow, echoing drops. The passage below was a narrow vein under the house, lit by a single lantern flickering weakly. 2 more figures waited there, cloaks pulled low, shadows hiding their faces. One whispered, voice rough and quiet, "You want out? One chance. If they find you here, no one survives." The tunnel walls closed in, breathing moisture and fear. Every sound felt too loud. Their footsteps on gravel, the rasp of fabric brushing stone, the lantern sputtering in the stale air. Above, a dull thud of boots on wooden floors, patrol moving just overhead. Everyone froze, breath caught in their throats until silence returned. They gathered close around a scrap of metal where someone had etched a rough map. Thin lines marking corridors, guards, a route to the north wall. A gloved finger tapped once. 2 nights from now. Don't be late, or you'll die waiting. The words hung like a sentence as they retraced their steps, every step a prayer not to be heard. The hatch closed behind them with a soft scrape, erasing all trace of the passage. Just before parting, one of the hooded figures gripped Martha III's wrist, whispering against her ear, each word sharp and heavy. If they know you, we're here, they won't kill you quick. The figure melted back into the dark, leaving only the quiet hum of the house above, a reminder that danger didn't always shout. Sometimes, it breathed right next to you. The laundry room smelled of soap and damp cloth, steam rising from wooden tubs, curling in the stale air. Guards lingered outside the door, their voices low, just enough to remind everyone they were listening. Handmaids worked in silence, heads bowed, hands moving automatically through endless fabric. Martha III folded sheets beside a pale, thin woman, her belly round beneath the red robe, movement slow but determined. They worked shoulder to shoulder, never looking directly at each other. Minutes passed before the woman's lips moved, barely parting, words hidden in the rustle of cloth. North wall. 2 nights. Martha III's fingers stilled for a fraction of a second, then moved again, folding, stacking, eyes fixed on the linen. She whispered back, breath light enough to vanish into steam. Together, or not at all. The woman gave the faintest nod, hands trembling as she pressed down another sheet. Outside, boots scraped against the floor, stopping near the door. The guards' shadows loomed under the crack. Both women kept working, faster, every movement deliberate, as though nothing had been said. Hours dragged by, water sloshing, fabric snapping in the air, the mechanical rhythm of obedience wrapping them both in a fragile shield. When the last pile of linen was folded, the pregnant woman hesitated before speaking again, voice barely a thread. "I can't let them have this one." Her hand brushed her stomach for a heartbeat before returning to her work. "We go, or I don't let it live in this place." A sudden creak of the door made them freeze. A guard stepped inside, eyes scanning the room slowly. He said nothing, only stared at them long enough to make the air burn in their lungs. Then he murmured flatly, words scraping like metal. "Remember curfew." He left, the heavy door slamming shut behind him. The silence that followed was too deep, too brittle. It felt like the walls themselves had heard every whispered word. Martha III folded the last sheet with hands that would not stop shaking, knowing that the plan, fragile as glass, was already set in motion, and any wrong sound could shatter it forever. The study smelled of tobacco and old leather, the air heavy, stale, waiting. A guard opened the door just wide enough to push Martha III inside, then closed it behind her with a muted thud. The commander sat at his desk, lamplight carving hard shadows across his face. He didn't greet her, only gestured to the chair opposite him. She stood frozen a moment too long, then sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes lowered. The silence stretched until the ticking clock on the wall felt like hammer blows. Finally, his voice came, calm, deliberate, each word a hook. "Freedom," he said slowly, turning a glass of whiskey between his fingers, "is never free." He let the sentence hang, watching her face though she kept her eyes on the desk. "You want out, don't you?" No answer. "No." The soft scrape of his chair across the floor as he leaned closer. "Names. That's all I need." He paused, voice like velvet hiding steel. "Tell me who whispers of escape, and you walk out of here one day." Martha III's fingers dug into her skirt, shoulders rigid, breath shallow. He reached across the desk, not touching her hand, but hovering close enough to feel his presence like heat. "This place doesn't forgive mistakes," he murmured. But I can protect you. Only me. Footsteps passed outside the door, paused briefly. The commander's gaze flicked toward the sound, then back to her, eyes colder than stone. Think carefully. Tomorrow, you may not get to choose. The room felt airless, shrinking with every second she didn't answer. The ticking clock seemed louder, sharper, like a countdown. He leaned back finally, swirling the whiskey in his glass, voice returning to its calm, rehearsed tone. No rush, but you know where to find me. The guard reappeared, opening the door soundlessly. As she left, his words followed, soft enough only she could hear, wrapping around her like a chain. Freedom has a price. Decide if you're willing to pay. The tunnel beneath the house smelled of damp stone and old fear. Lantern light flickered weakly, casting long, broken shadows along the crumbling walls. Martha III stood with 4 others, their faces half hidden under hoods, voices barely more than breaths. They had just begun to trace lines on the metal scrap map when a figure burst in through the hatch above, breathless, eyes wide. They know, she hissed. The north wall isn't safe. Someone talked. Silence fell heavy, sharper than any scream. One of the women whispered, trembling, "Who told them?" Another hissed back, "It's one of us." The words cracked the air, turning it brittle. Lantern light swung wildly as hands pointed, accusations spilling in broken whispers. She went missing last night. She asked too many questions. Each sentence landed like a blow, suspicion ricocheting in the small, suffocating space. Above them, boots pounded on the wooden floorboards. Doors slamming, muffled shouts, alarms rising like distant thunder. The tunnel seemed to shrink, pressing closer around their hunched bodies. A young handmaid tried to bolt for the passage out. 2 others grabbed her arms, voices clashing in desperate whispers. "You sold us out." "I swear I didn't," she thrashed, sobbing, breath harsh in the dark, but the grip on her didn't loosen. Martha III pressed against the damp wall, heartbeat hammering like a drum under her ribs. Every sound above grew louder, a door thrown open, a metallic clang, the unmistakable jangle of keys finding the right lock. The group froze, heads snapping toward the stairwell. A lantern sputtered once, nearly dying, as a new noise cut through the tense quiet. Metal scraping, the hatch being unlocked from the outside. Then a cold voice rolled down into the tunnel, smooth and merciless, echoing off stone like a verdict already passed. Dawn broke without warmth. A pale, washed-out light bled over the courtyard as handmaids were marched out in rows, red robes swaying like muted flames in the cold morning air. Guards lined the edges of the square, rifles slung across their chests, boots grinding against stone in perfect unison. Martha III kept her eyes down, every breath shallow, every step measured. The air smelled of damp earth and iron, sharp, metallic, like blood long dried yet never gone. At the center of the courtyard, a single figure knelt on the stone tiles. Her hands were bound, hood pulled back, face pale and trembling in the dim light. A preacher stood beside her, voice calm and deliberate, reading from a book as though it were scripture etched in fire. Sin is freedom. Freedom is death. Obedience is the only grace. The crowd murmured the response in a dull, monotone whisper. Grace saves. Grace binds. No one looked at the kneeling woman, but every muscle in every body was locked tight, waiting for what always came next. A guard stepped forward, gloved hands steady, a blade gleaming dull silver in the cold light. No words were spoken, only the soft hiss of steel cutting the air. A sound too fast, too final. A single drop of red hit the pale stone first, followed by more, slow and deliberate as they spread like a dark stain across the courtyard. The preacher closed the book softly, as if finishing a lullaby. The guards dragged the still body away, leaving only the mark of what happened behind. Martha III's knees trembled under her robe, but she stood rigid, just like the others. None dared to flinch, none dared to breathe too loud. Above them, on a balcony overlooking the scene, the commander's wife watched, lips curved in the faintest smile, cold, approving, satisfied. As the handmaids were dismissed, boots scuffing softly back toward the dormitories, a guard brushed past Martha 3. His voice was a low rasp meant only for her ears. Remember this, next time you think of running. Midnight draped the estate in heavy darkness. Only the faint glow of watchtowers cut through the mist, their beams sweeping slowly across the high walls. Martha 3 stood by the laundry door, heart slamming against her ribs, every breath sharp and shallow. Beside her, the pregnant handmaid waited, pale, trembling, clutching the edge of her robe like a lifeline. A soft click. The service door eased open just wide enough for them to slip through. The cold air bit into their skin. Grass damp beneath bare feet. The world outside the house vast and terrifying. They crouched low, moving fast but silent, every sound amplified. The rustle of fabric, the thud of their racing hearts, the faint whistle of wind against the fence. Behind them, alarms were only a hum in the distance. Then a bark of a command shattered the night. "Patrol shift!" Boots struck stone in sharp rhythm. The women froze, pressed to the ground as a searchlight swept close, pausing over the path they had just crossed before swinging away again. They ran, mud pulling at their feet, the ground uneven and slick. Branches scratched their arms, breath burned in their throats. Each step felt like a drumbeat counting down to capture. A fence loomed ahead, barbed wire snarled at the top. Martha 3 crouched, pushing the other woman up first, wincing as cloth tore, metal biting into skin. A grunt of pain, a muffled gasp, then they both tumbled to the other side, landing hard on wet soil. Gunshots cracked in the distance. Shouting followed, carried on the cold wind. A dog barked furiously, chain rattling, handlers yelling commands. The night turned into chaos, sirens wailing, spotlights cutting across the fields like blades. They stumbled toward a rusted gate half buried in weeds, pushing it open just enough to squeeze through. The hinges screamed. A sound too loud, too exposing. They slipped into the darkness beyond the fence, breathless, shaking, the cold biting their bones. For one fragile moment, the world seemed still. Then a voice boomed over loudspeakers behind them, sharp, commanding, impossible to outrun. "They're loose! Bring them back alive!" The night bled slowly into a dull, gray morning. Mist curled low over the ground as Martha 3 and the pregnant handmaid stumbled through the wasteland beyond the compound. Their breaths came ragged, every step dragging heavier than the last. The first sight of the city rose in the distance. Skeletal towers torn open, windows shattered, streets split and overgrown. No birds sang, no life stirred. Only the low whistle of wind moving through hollow buildings like a morning song. They crossed cracked pavement, littered with rusted cars and broken glass. Boot soles scraping softly, the sound loud in the desolation. A torn billboard leaned sideways, faded words promising harmony through obedience above a bullet-ridden smiling face. The women slipped inside a collapsed cafe for cover. The air thick with dust, old coffee cups overturned on broken counters. They sank to the floor behind a toppled table, sharing a crust of stolen bread in silence. Every breath was a rasp, every swallow an effort. Then came the hum, faint at first, growing louder, mechanical. A drone floated into view between ruined buildings, its red sensor sweeping the empty streets in slow, deliberate arcs. Martha 3 pulled the other woman down lower, hearts hammering, breath held so tight it hurt. The light swept past their hiding spot, paused for a terrifying moment on the doorway, then drifted on. When the hum faded, the silence that followed felt wrong, expectant. Far off, a metallic voice crackled from a speaker mounted on a leaning streetlight. "Fugitives will be returned. Mercy is over." The words carried over the ruins, thin and sharp like knives. They moved again, crouching low, weaving between debris, every corner a possible trap. At the far end of the street, through the morning mist, a figure stood motionless, too far to see clearly, human or machine, friend or hunter. But it was facing them, waiting. The pregnant handmaid clutched Martha 3's arm, breath shaky, whispering, we're not alone. And as they froze in the ruins, a chill slid through the air. Not from the wind, but from the weight of unseen eyes already tracking every move they made. The service station was nothing more than a shell. Walls scorched black, roof half gone, air thick with the smell of rust and ash. Martha III crouched behind a broken counter, the pregnant handmaid beside her, both shaking from exhaustion and cold. A faint burst of static crackled from a nearby radio. Then a man's voice, sharp, triumphant, slicing through the silence. "Thanks to Commander Halvern's intelligence, fugitives will lead us straight to the nest. Repeat, target extraction imminent." The words hit like a blow. Martha III froze, stomach hollow, ears ringing. The other woman whispered, voice trembling, desperate. "He knew, all along. He sent us out here like bait." Outside, armored trucks rolled slowly down the ruined street, their engines low, steady, like predators stalking prey. Searchlights swung over fallen buildings, sweeping closer with every pass. The sound of boots crunching gravel echoed between shattered walls, measured, methodical, inevitable. A drone buzzed overhead, mechanical whir growing louder. The women pressed flat to the floor, breath held so tight it hurt, praying the sensor light wouldn't find them. It drifted past once, paused, then moved on, red beams scanning the next ruin. Far off, a flare arced into the sky, bursting in harsh orange light that painted the dead city in fire. Voices shouted orders, amplified through radios, closer now. Every direction felt closed, every shadow unsafe. Martha III's hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white, as the truth dug deeper. There had never been a real chance. They were never escaping. They were leading hunters straight to others. A loudspeaker blared suddenly, voice cold, confident, echoing over the ruins. "Target sighted. No mistakes this time." The sound of rifles being readied followed. Metal clicks, sharp, final. And for the first time since fleeing the house, Martha III felt there might be nowhere left to run. The night air was sharp, biting at their skin as they ran. Boots pounding on rusted metal, breaths tearing in and out like knives. Behind them, shouts rose, harsh and relentless. Rifles clattering, bullets whining off twisted steel beams. The bridge stretched out ahead, a narrow, broken skeleton of iron and wire dangling over a black chasm. Every step made the structure groan, cables straining, bolts shifting with an ominous screech. The pregnant handmaid stumbled once, clutching her belly, gasping, "Go! Don't wait for me!" Martha III pulled her forward, voice a hoarse whisper. "We do this together." But the soldiers were closer now. The sound of boots hammering against the metal grates, a hunting pack closing in. A searchlight swept across the bridge, blinding for an instant. A bullet snapped past, sparking off the railing. The bridge trembled violently under their weight, threatening to give way at every step. Halfway across, the pregnant woman faltered again, falling to her knees, breath ragged, sweat slick on her forehead despite the cold. Martha III bent to pull her up, panic raw in her chest. The woman's eyes found hers, wide, terrified, yet burning with fierce resolve. "One of us has to live," she whispered, voice broken but steady. "Go. Don't look back." Martha III shook her head desperately, tears streaking through dirt on her cheeks. No, I won't leave you." A gunshot cracked closer this time, the impact ringing off steel just inches from them. The pregnant handmaid's grip on Martha III's arm tightened, nails biting through fabric, then shoved hard, forcing her forward. "Run!" she screamed, voice ripping through the chaos. Martha III stumbled ahead, feet pounding the swaying bridge, sobs tearing from her throat. Behind her, soldiers shouted, the noise erupting like thunder, followed by more gunfire, metal screaming under weight and struggle. Then a single, heart-stopping sound, a final scream, swallowed by the roar of collapsing steel. The bridge shook violently under Martha III's feet before stilling, leaving only wind howling over emptiness. She reached the far side, falling to her knees, clutching the frozen earth, breath ragged and uneven. The night was silent now, but it wasn't safety. It was loss, heavy and unending. Her hands trembled as she turned toward the broken bridge, tears burning in her eyes. No one followed. There was no one left to follow, and the only words that remained, echoing in her mind like a dying prayer, were the last ones she had heard. One of us has to live. The forest swallowed her steps. Every twig snapping underfoot sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. Cold mist curled around the trees, clinging to her torn robe, dampening her hair and skin. Martha 3 stumbled forward, lungs burning, legs leaden with exhaustion. But she didn't stop. The broken bridge was far behind now, yet the memory of it, of the scream, of what she had left behind, followed like a second shadow. Every breath carried guilt, grief, and a faint, stubborn spark of survival. She pushed through thick underbrush. Branches clawed at her arms, mud sucked at her bare feet, roots threatened to drag her down. The world felt endless and empty, yet every gust of wind carried the echo of sirens somewhere far off, still searching. At last, the trees thinned, revealing a field bathed in pale dawn light, low mist rolling over wet grass. And there, half buried in the dirt, stood a weathered sign. Letters faded, chipped, but still readable. Free zone, 1 mile. Her breath hitched, heart clenching painfully in her chest. 1 mile, just 1 more mile. She staggered forward, every step a battle against fatigue and fear. Behind her, a low mechanical hum rose, distant but closing. Drones cutting through the morning air like vultures circling prey. She dropped low for a moment, crawling through the wet grass, clutching the earth like it could hide her heartbeat. The sound faded slightly, but it never truly left. Finally, the tree line opened again, revealing a stretch of open land leading to another forest beyond. No walls, no guards in sight. Freedom lay ahead, or something that only pretended to be freedom. Martha 3 stood there trembling, tears sliding silently down her dirt-streaked face. She whispered into the cold air, voice shaking, breaking on every word. If this is freedom, why does it still feel like a cage? The wind carried her words away, into a horizon that offered no answers. Only more silence.